The autumn wind cut through downtown Detroit like a blade, sending dried leaves skittering across the cracked pavement as I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders. My name is Ezekiel Whitmore, and at 34, I'd grown accustomed to the weight of disappointment that seemed to follow me everywhere, from the cramped apartment I could barely afford to the warehouse job that paid just enough to keep me afloat. "You don't have any part in the inheritance, Zeke," my sister Cordelia's words echoed in my mind for the 1,000th time since our father's funeral 3 years ago. "Daddy made it clear, everything goes to me. You know how he felt about your choices, those choices. Moving away from the family business to work with my hands instead of pushing papers, refusing to play the political games that came so naturally to Cordelia, being honest when she preferred manipulation. Our father, Mortimer Whitmore, had built a small real estate empire in Detroit's better neighborhoods, and according to Cordelia, he'd decided I wasn't worthy of any of it. The November sky was the color of old steel as I stood outside Secure Store storage facility on 8 Mile Road. In my hand, I clutched a small key that had arrived in my mailbox yesterday with a notice, "Final payment overdue. Unit 247 contents will be disposed of in 48 hours. I'd never heard of this storage unit before, but the rental agreement was clearly in my father's name, and somehow the key had found its way to me. "Can I help you?" The facility manager, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes named Rosa Martinez, looked up from her computer as I approached the office counter. "I received this notice about a unit," I said, sliding the paper across the counter. "Unit 247. I'm Ezekiel Whitmore. I think this might have belonged to my father, Mortimer." Rosa's expression softened with recognition. "Oh, Mr. Whitmore, your father was a good man, paid on time for 15 years, never missed a payment until—" She trailed off, checking her records. "Until about 6 months after he passed. Someone's been paying since then, but the payments stopped coming 3 months ago." My heart skipped. Someone's been paying? Who? The payments came from Whitmore Properties, LLC. I assumed it was family handling his affairs. Cordelia. She'd known about this unit all along and had been paying for it. But why stop now? Why let me find out about it? Rosa handed me a clipboard. "You'll need to sign here and show ID. The unit's been sealed, but you're listed as an emergency contact, so you have access rights." 20 minutes later, I stood before Unit 247, a standard 10x20 storage space with a rolling metal door. My hands trembled slightly as I inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through my chest. The door rolled up with a metallic groan, revealing a space packed with furniture covered in white sheets, boxes stacked neatly against the walls, and filing cabinets that looked like they belonged in an office. Everything was organized with the same meticulous care my father had shown in life. Dust motes danced in the shaft of grey light that filtered in from outside. I pulled the sheet off the nearest piece of furniture, revealing my father's old mahogany desk, the one from his home office that Cordelia claimed had been donated to charity. Anger flared in my chest, but I pushed it down. There had to be a reason for all this secrecy. Moving deeper into the unit, I opened the first filing cabinet. Inside were folders labeled with addresses, property deeds, and legal documents. As I flipped through them, my confusion grew. These weren't just any properties. These were valuable holdings throughout Detroit and the surrounding suburbs. Properties I'd never heard Cordelia mention when she'd explained the meager inheritance our father had left behind. "What the hell?" I whispered, pulling out a thick folder labeled Primary Residence, 1247 Elmwood Avenue. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was the deed to a beautiful Victorian house in one of Detroit's most sought-after neighborhoods, a house worth easily $500,000. But it wasn't the value that made my legs weak. It was the name on the deed, Ezekiel Mortimer Whitmore, not Cordelia, me. The property had been transferred to my name 2 weeks before my father's death, according to the documentation. There was a handwritten note paperclip to the deed in my father's familiar scrawl. "For Zeke, the son who stayed true to himself. This house and everything in this unit belongs to you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Monsieur Whitmore." I sank into my father's desk chair, the note trembling in my hands. The cold November air seemed to disappear as heat flooded my face. Cordelia had lied, not just lied. She'd orchestrated an elaborate deception to steal what was rightfully mine. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Cordelia, hope you're not working too hard at that warehouse, little brother. Some of us have real responsibilities to handle." For the first time in 3 years, I smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. I spent the next 2 hours going through every box, every folder, every document in that storage unit. What I found painted a picture of betrayal that was both stunning and methodical. My father had left me not just the house on Elmwood Avenue, but 3 rental properties, a small commercial building, and a savings account with over $200,000. All documented, all legal, all mine. There were also letters, dozens of them, addressed to me in my father's handwriting, dated in the months before his death. Letters that Cordelia had clearly intercepted and hidden away. Letters that revealed the truth about our father's feelings, his pride in my independence, his disappointment in Cordelia's greed and manipulation. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the storage facility, I loaded the most important documents into my car. The deed to the house sat on my passenger seat like a weapon. Tomorrow I would take these documents to a lawyer. Tomorrow I would confront Cordelia. But tonight I had one more stop to make. The house at 1247 Elmwood Avenue stood like something from a dream in the gathering darkness. It was even more beautiful than the photographs in the file. 3 stories of Victorian elegance with a wraparound porch and stained glass windows that caught the light from the street lamps. A for rent sign swayed in the front yard, and beneath it, in smaller print, managed by Whitmore Properties, LLC, my house. My father had left me this beautiful house, and Cordelia had been renting it out, keeping every penny for herself, while I struggled to pay rent on a 1-bedroom apartment across town. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the house that should have been my home for the past 3 years. The weight of Cordelia's betrayal pressed down on me like a physical thing, but beneath it, something else was growing, a determination I hadn't felt in years. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed Cordelia's name. "Hello, sister," I answered, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Zeke, you sound weird. Everything okay?" Her voice had that false sweetness she used when she was fishing for information. "Everything's perfect, Cordelia. In fact, I'd say everything's finally falling into place." There was a pause. "What's that supposed to mean?" I looked at the house, my house, and smiled. "It means I'll see you soon. We have a lot to talk about." I hung up before she could respond and started my car. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and confrontations and the battle of my life. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I had a fighting chance. The key to my father's storage unit lay warm in my palm as I drove away from Elmwood Avenue. It had unlocked more than just a metal door. It had unlocked the truth, and the truth, I was beginning to understand, was going to set me free. The law office of Henderson, Clark & Associates occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower in downtown Detroit, its windows offering a panoramic view of the Detroit River and the Canadian skyline beyond. I sat in the waiting area, the manila folder containing my father's documents balanced on my knees, watching the morning rush hour traffic crawl along Jefferson Avenue below. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Cordelia's face at our father's funeral, the perfect picture of grief as she accepted condolences and spoke about carrying on his legacy, all while she knew she was stealing mine. Mr. Whitmore, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes, approached. "I'm Patricia Henderson. Thank you for coming in on such short notice." Patricia Henderson had the reputation of being one of Detroit's most tenacious estate attorneys. When I'd called her office at 7 this morning, explaining I had urgent questions about a contested inheritance, she'd agreed to squeeze me in between appointments. Her office was lined with law books and framed diplomas, but what caught my attention was the collection of photographs showing her with various clients, people who looked like they'd been through battles and won. "Please sit down," she said, settling behind her desk. "Tell me what's going on." I opened the folder and spread the documents across her desk, the deed to the Elmwood Avenue house, the bank statements, the rental property documents, my father's handwritten note. Patricia's expression grew more serious as she examined each piece of evidence. "This is substantial," she said finally, looking up at me with raised eyebrows. "Walk me through what happened after your father's death." I told her everything. Cordelia's claims about the inheritance, the storage unit, the discovery of the documents. Patricia took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her pen scratching steadily across her legal pad. "And your sister has been managing these properties since your father's death?" she asked. "According to the rental records I found, yes. The house on Elmwood alone has been bringing in $2,800 a month for the past 3 years. That's over $100,000 she's collected on property that legally belongs to me. Patricia leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her lips. Ezekiel, may I call you Ezekiel? This is a clear case of inheritance fraud and conversion of assets. These documents appear to be legitimate and properly executed. The question is, why did your sister think she could get away with this? Because she thought I'd never find out. She convinced me that Dad had left me nothing, that I wasn't worth remembering in his will, and I believed her. The admission stung, but it was the truth. Did you ever see the actual will? I shook my head. She said it was private, that there was no need for me to see it since I wasn't mentioned. Patricia's eyes hardened. That's a red flag right there. In Michigan, beneficiaries have the right to see the will during probate. The fact that she discouraged you from looking into it suggests she knew exactly what she was doing. She gathered the documents and organized them into neat piles. Here's what I recommend. First, we file a formal complaint with the probate court challenging the administration of your father's estate. Second, we demand an accounting of all assets and how they've been managed since his death. Third, we seek immediate injunctive relief to prevent any further disposition of assets until this matter is resolved. How long will this take? That depends on how cooperative your sister is. If she fights us at every step, it could take months. If she's smart and realizes she's been caught red-handed, we might resolve this much sooner. Patricia leaned forward. I have to ask, are you prepared for this to get ugly? Family disputes over money often bring out the worst in people. I thought about the years I'd spent believing I was worthless in my father's eyes, the nights I'd laid awake, wondering if I'd disappointed him somehow. I thought about Cordelia living in luxury while I counted pennies for groceries. She's been getting ugly for 3 years, Miss Henderson. I'm just evening the playing field. Patricia smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. Good. I'll start preparing the paperwork today. In the meantime, I need you to gather any other documents you might have, old letters from your father, emails, anything that might support your case. And Ezekiel? Yes? Don't contact your sister directly about this. Let me handle all communications from here on out. The last thing we want is for her to claim you threatened or coerced her. I left the law office feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time since my father's death, I wasn't walking through the world with my shoulders hunched against invisible blows. I had evidence. I had a lawyer. I had hope. The November day had turned crisp and bright, the kind of weather that made Detroit's Renaissance neighborhoods shine. Instead of heading directly back to work, I decided to make another stop. I wanted to see the rental properties that were apparently mine. The first address led me to a duplex in Corktown, one of Detroit's oldest neighborhoods, that had undergone significant revitalization in recent years. The building was well maintained, with fresh paint and a small garden out front. A young couple was loading groceries from their car, laughing together as they juggled bags and keys. My tenants, living in my building, paying rent to my sister. I drove to the second property, a single-family home in the Boston Edison Historic District. This one was even more impressive. A 1920s colonial with original hardwood floors, visible through the front windows, and a beautifully restored front porch. The For Rent sign in the yard showed the same contact information, Whitmore Properties, LLC. By the time I reached the third property, a charming bungalow near the Detroit Institute of Arts, the full scope of what Cordelia had stolen began to sink in. These weren't just properties, they were homes, investments, a legacy my father had carefully built and preserved, and she had taken all of it, while convincing me I was nothing more than an afterthought. My phone buzzed with a text from my supervisor at the warehouse. Where are you? You missed the morning shift. I'd completely forgotten about work. For 3 years, that job had been my lifeline, the only thing standing between me and complete financial ruin. Now, looking at the property portfolio my father had actually left me, I realized I'd been living in artificial poverty, while my real inheritance generated hundreds of thousands of dollars for someone else. I called my supervisor, Marcus Thompson, a decent man who'd always treated me fairly despite the chaos that seemed to follow me everywhere. Marcus, it's Zeke. I'm sorry about this morning. I had a family emergency. Everything okay, man? You've been solid for 3 years. This isn't like you. It's complicated, but yeah, everything's going to be okay. Better than okay, actually. Can I take a personal day? I know it's short notice, but take the time you need, Zeke. Just keep me posted. As I drove back toward my apartment, I passed a small cafe called Roasted Bean in Midtown. On impulse, I pulled over and went inside. I hadn't eaten since yesterday, and the events of the morning had left me drained. The cafe was warm and inviting, with exposed brick walls and the rich aroma of fresh coffee. I ordered a sandwich and coffee and found a table by the window. As I ate, I watched the city move around me, people heading to jobs, students walking to classes at Wayne State University, families pushing strollers through the revitalizing neighborhood. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged to this city rather than just surviving in it. My phone rang. Cordelia. I almost let it go to voicemail, but then I remembered Patricia's advice about not contacting her directly. If she was calling me, that was different. Hello, Cordelia. Zeke, where have you been? I tried calling you last night after we hung up, and then again this morning. You sounded so strange yesterday. Her voice had lost its usual confident edge. She sounded worried. I've been busy. Busy with what? It's not like you have a lot going on. The old condescension crept back into her voice, but it felt different now. Hollow, performative. Actually, I do have a lot going on. More than you know. What's that supposed to mean? Zeke, you're scaring me. You're not thinking of doing something stupid, are you? I almost laughed. After 3 years of emotional manipulation, she was worried about me doing something stupid. I'm thinking of doing something smart for once. Something I should have done a long time ago. There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. Why don't you come over for dinner tonight? We haven't talked properly in months. I'll make that pot roast you used to love. The pot roast she used to love. Cordelia hadn't cooked a meal in years. She had a housekeeper for that. This invitation was about information gathering, nothing more. I can't tonight. I have plans. Plans? With who? Goodbye, Cordelia. I hung up and finished my sandwich in peace. Tomorrow, Patricia would file the paperwork that would officially start this war. Tonight, I wanted to enjoy what might be my last quiet evening for a while. But first, I had one more stop to make. I wanted to see the inside of my house. The locksmith, a weathered man named Dale Kowalski, studied the deed with the thoroughness of someone who'd been in business long enough to avoid legal troubles. We stood on the front porch of 1247 Elmwood Avenue as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Victorians' wraparound veranda. This all looks legitimate, Dale said finally, folding the document and handing it back to me. Properties in your name, deeds notarized and recorded. But I gotta ask, you sure you want to do this? Changing locks on a rental property without notice to tenants can get messy. It's not currently occupied, I said, pointing to the for rent sign. And I'm not changing the locks. I'm exercising my legal right to access my own property. Dale shrugged and pulled out his tools. Your call, boss. Give me 10 minutes. While he worked, I walked around the house, seeing it properly for the first time. The Victorian had been meticulously maintained. The paint was fresh, the gutters clean, the small garden professionally landscaped. Cordelia might be a thief, but she'd been a conscientious property manager. Every dollar she'd stolen from me had been invested back into maximizing the rental value. All set, Dale announced, handing me a new set of keys. Change the deadbolt and the back door. You want me to rekey the windows too? No, this is fine, thank you. After Dale left, I stood alone on the porch, keys warm in my palm. 3 years ago, while I'd been sitting in that funeral home listening to Cordelia accept condolences for both of us, I could have been planning to move into this house. Instead, I'd been preparing to move into the cheapest apartment I could find. The front door opened with a satisfying click. Inside, the house was even more beautiful than I'd imagined. Hardwood floors stretched through spacious rooms filled with afternoon light. The living room had a working fireplace with original tilework, and the dining room featured built-in china cabinets with leaded glass doors. Everything was clean and ready for showing to prospective tenants. I climbed the staircase to the second floor, my footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. The master bedroom was generous, with tall windows overlooking the tree-lined street. There were 2 other bedrooms and a renovated bathroom with period fixtures and modern amenities. The third floor had been converted into a large office space with skylights and exposed beams, the kind of room I'd dreamed of having someday. This house wasn't just valuable, it was perfect. It was everything I would have chosen for myself if I'd had the money and opportunity. My father had known me better than I'd realized. I was standing in the kitchen, admiring the restored cabinets and granite countertops, when I heard a car door slam outside. Through the window, I watched a black BMW pull into the driveway. Cordelia emerged from the driver's seat, moving with the quick, purposeful stride she used when she was angry. She had a key. Of course she had a key. I heard her trying to unlock the front door, The scraping sound of metal against metal as she struggled with the changed lock. Then silence. Then footsteps around the side of the house toward the back door. More frustrated key jiggling. I'd changed that lock too. "Ezekiel," she called out, her voice sharp with authority. "I know you're in there. Open this door right now." I walked slowly to the front door and opened it. Cordelia stood on the porch, her usually perfect composure cracked. Her designer coat was wrinkled, her carefully styled blonde hair disheveled. She looked like she'd driven here in a panic. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she demanded, pushing past me into the house. "You can't just break into private property." "I didn't break in, I used my key." She spun around to face me. "Your key? Zeke, this isn't your house. I manage this property for me," I interrupted, pulling the deed from my jacket pocket. "This house belongs to me, Cordelia. It's been mine for 3 years. The color drained from her face as she recognized the document. For a moment she just stared at it, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Then the mask slipped back into place. "That's impossible. Daddy left everything to me. I handled the estate, I saw the will." "You saw a will, but you didn't tell me about this one." I unfolded my father's handwritten note and held it out to her. "Or about the storage unit, or about the rental properties, or about the $200,000 in the bank account." Cordelia's face went through several expressions: shock, calculation, and finally, cold fury. "Where did you get these? Does it matter? The question is why you've been lying to me for 3 years." She walked to the living room window, her back to me, gathering herself. When she turned around, she was smiling. The same patronizing smile she'd been giving me since childhood. "Oh, Zeke, you always were so naive. Do you really think Daddy wanted you to have all this? A man who couldn't even hold down a decent job, who chose to work in warehouses instead of joining the family business. Apparently he did think I should have it. It's all documented." "Documented by who?" "Some papers you found in a storage unit." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Anyone can forge documents, little brother. Anyone can write a note and pretend it's from Daddy's." The old doubt crept in for a moment, the familiar voice that whispered I wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't worthy of anything good. But then I looked around the beautiful house, remembered Patricia Henderson's confident assessment of the documents, and the doubt faded. "The deed is recorded with the county, Cordelia. The bank accounts have my name on them. The storage unit rental agreement is in Dad's handwriting, witnessed and notarized. You can call it fake all you want, but the courts will see it differently." "The courts?" Her composure cracked again. "You're threatening to take me to court? Over what? Some fantasy that Daddy secretly loved you more? Over theft, over fraud, over 3 years of lying to me while you collected rent on my properties and spent money from my accounts." Cordelia moved closer, her voice dropping to the intimate, manipulative tone she'd perfected over the years. "Zeke, honey, think about what you're saying. Even if these documents are real, which I'm not admitting, do you really want to destroy our family over money? We're all each other has left. We stopped being family the day you decided to steal from me." "I didn't steal anything. I've been managing Dad's properties, maintaining them, dealing with tenants and repairs and taxes." "Do you have any idea how much work that is? How much responsibility? Responsibility you took on with my assets, collecting income that belonged to me." She was close enough now that I could see the desperation in her eyes, hidden beneath the layers of makeup and practiced manipulation. "Fine. Let's say these documents are legitimate. We can work something out. Split everything 50-50. You get the house, I keep the rental properties. We both walk away happy. I already have the house, Cordelia, and the rental properties, and everything else Dad left me. The only question is whether you're going to return what you've stolen or whether my lawyer has to take it from you." "Your lawyer?" She stepped back as if I'd struck her. "You hired a lawyer?" "Patricia Henderson, maybe you've heard of her." The name hit Cordelia like a physical blow. Patricia Henderson's reputation preceded her, and from Cordelia's expression, she knew exactly what kind of fight she was facing. "You son of a bitch," she whispered. "After everything I've done for you, everything I've sacrificed." "What have you sacrificed? Your chance to steal even more?" Cordelia's mask finally fell away completely. The woman standing in front of me was nobody I recognized, face twisted with rage, eyes wild with a fury I'd never seen before. "You think Dad loved you?" she snarled. "You think those little notes mean something? He was senile at the end, Zeke, confused, probably didn't even know what he was signing. The real will, the one that matters, leaves everything to me. Then you won't mind showing it to the court." I don't have to show you anything. I don't have to justify anything to someone who spent his whole life disappointing everyone who ever cared about him. The words should have hurt. 3 years ago, they would have destroyed me. But standing in my father's house, surrounded by evidence of his love and faith in me, they just felt empty. Get out, I said quietly. What? Get out of my house, now. You can't make me. I can and I am. This is my property and you're trespassing. Cordelia looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time, really seeing it as something that didn't belong to her. The calculation returned to her eyes. This isn't over, Ezekiel. You have no idea what you're starting. Yes, I do. I'm finishing what you started 3 years ago. She stormed toward the door, then turned back one last time. You'll regret this. You're not strong enough for the fight you're picking. You never were. The front door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. I watched through the curtains as she sat in her BMW for several minutes, probably making phone calls. When she finally drove away, she left rubber marks on the driveway. I walked through the house again, more slowly this time. In the silence, I could almost hear my father's voice, the way it had sounded when I was young and he still believed I might follow in his footsteps, before the arguments about college and career choices and expectations had driven us apart. Maybe Cordelia was right about one thing. Maybe I wasn't strong enough for this fight, but I was going to find out. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Enjoyed meeting you today. Paperwork will be filed first thing tomorrow morning. Get some rest. The real work starts soon. Patricia. I locked up the house and drove back to my apartment as the sun set over Detroit. Tomorrow the war would begin in earnest. Tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I would sleep in peace, knowing that I was finally fighting for something that was rightfully mine. But as I lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling of my cramped apartment, I couldn't shake the memory of the look in Cordelia's eyes when she'd left. I'd seen anger before, but this had been something deeper, something that felt like desperation. And desperate people, I was beginning to understand, were capable of almost anything. The Wayne County Probate Court looked like a fortress from the outside. All granite blocks and narrow windows that seemed designed to intimidate rather than welcome. I stood on the courthouse steps with Patricia Henderson, watching Cordelia emerge from a black sedan across the street, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. She brought reinforcements, I observed. Patricia followed my gaze and smiled grimly. Theodore Blackwood and Associates. I should have expected as much. Blackwood's known for taking questionable cases if the client has deep enough pockets. Is that bad for us? It's expensive for her. Blackwood charges premium rates for his particular brand of aggressive representation. Patricia adjusted her briefcase strap. The fact that she hired him tells me 2 things. She knows she's in trouble, and she's prepared to spend whatever it takes to avoid consequences. As Cordelia's legal team approached the courthouse entrance, she caught sight of us and changed direction. She looked immaculate as always. Navy suit, perfect makeup, hair styled in a way that probably cost more than I made in a week at the warehouse. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful way she held her expression neutral. "Ezekiel," she said when she reached us, her voice formal and cold. "Ms. Henderson." "Mrs. Whitmore Sullivan," Patricia replied with equal coldness. "I trust you received our filing yesterday." "I did. Along with your creative interpretation of my family's estate planning." Cordelia's gaze shifted to me. "I'm disappointed, Zeke. I thought we could handle this as family." "We could have," I said, 3 years ago, when you should have told me the truth." One of her lawyers, a tall man with silver hair and predatory eyes, stepped forward. "Theodore Blackwood," he said, extending his hand to Patricia, but ignoring me entirely. "I'm hoping we can resolve this matter quickly and amicably. My client is prepared to offer a reasonable settlement to avoid unnecessary litigation." "How reasonable?" Patricia asked. $50,000. Cash. Mr. Whitmore signs a release acknowledging that all claims against the estate have been satisfied, and everyone goes home happy. Patricia laughed, actually laughed. $50,000? For assets worth over $1 million? Theodore, I expected more from you. Blackwood's expression hardened. The assets in question are of disputed ownership. The legitimate will leaves everything to my client. These documents your client claims to have found are of questionable authenticity and were never properly probated. Then you won't mind having them examined by a court-appointed expert, Patricia countered, along with a full accounting of how those disputed assets have been managed since Mr. Mortimer Whitmore's death. I watched this legal chess match with fascination and growing confidence. Patricia clearly knew what she was doing, and Blackwood's bluster couldn't hide the weakness of his position. Gentlemen, ladies, the second lawyer interrupted, younger than Blackwood, nervous energy radiating from him. Perhaps we should continue this discussion inside. The hearing begins in 20 minutes. As we filed through the courthouse security, Cordelia fell into step beside me. You know, Zeke, it's not too late to be reasonable about this. We could still work something out privately. What's reasonable about keeping what belongs to me? What's reasonable about destroying our family over money? I stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Other people flowed around us. Lawyers, families, court staff. But for a moment it felt like we were alone. You destroyed our family the day you lied to me about Dad's will. The day you decided I was worth less than the rent money you could steal from me. This isn't about money, Cordelia. This is about 3 years of believing I was nothing, that Dad thought I was worthless, that I had to struggle and scrape for every dollar while you lived off my inheritance. For just a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped, and I saw something that might have been guilt, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. I was protecting you, she said quietly. Dad's affairs were complicated. There were debts, legal issues, tax problems. I handled all of that. I saved what I could. You saved it for yourself. I saved it for the family, for both of us. Then why didn't you tell me about any of it? She had no answer for that. The probate courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that gave everything a slightly greenish tinge. Judge Maria Santos presided from the bench, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. This is a motion to contest the administration of the estate of Mortimer James Whitmore, Judge Santos began, reading from the file. Petitioner alleges that assets rightfully belonging to him were improperly transferred to the estate administrator. Mrs. Whitmore Sullivan, as the administrator, how do you respond? Blackwood rose smoothly. Your Honor, this is a frivolous attempt to relitigate a properly settled estate. The petitioner has produced no evidence that would warrant reopening these proceedings. Actually, Your Honor, Patricia stood, holding up a thick folder. We have substantial evidence. We're prepared to present documentation showing that significant assets were transferred to Mr. Ezekiel Whitmore prior to his father's death, assets that were improperly included in the estate administered by Mrs. Whitmore Sullivan. Judge Santos looked intrigued. What kind of assets are we talking about? Real estate worth approximately $800,000, rental income of over $100,000 collected since Mr. Mortimer Whitmore's death, and bank accounts totaling more than $200,000. A murmur ran through the courtroom gallery. Even Judge Santos raised her eyebrows. That's substantial. Mr. Blackwood, were you aware of the scope of these alleged assets? Blackwood looked less confident than he had on the courthouse steps. Your Honor, my client has administered this estate in good faith according to the terms of the will. If Mr. Ezekiel Whitmore believed he had claims to additional assets, he should have raised them during the original probate proceedings. He wasn't informed that probate proceedings were taking place, Patricia interjected. Mrs. Whitmore Sullivan led him to believe he was not mentioned in the will and had no reason to participate in the process. Judge Santos frowned. Is that accurate, Mrs. Whitmore Sullivan? Cordelia stood, her voice steady but with an edge I recognized. Your Honor, my brother chose not to be involved in family business matters. When our father died, I reached out to inform him of the arrangements. He expressed no interest in the details. That's not true, I said, rising from my chair before Patricia could stop me. Mr. Whitmore, Judge Santos said, you'll have your chance to testify. Please sit down. Patricia put a hand on my arm and I sat, but my heart was pounding. Hearing Cordelia lie so smoothly in front of a judge made my anger burn hotter than ever. Your Honor, Patricia continued, we request that the court order a full accounting of all estate assets, including those currently being managed by Mrs. Whitmore Sullivan's company, and that a temporary restraining order be issued, preventing any further transfer or encumbrance of the disputed properties pending resolution of this matter. Objection, Blackwood said immediately. Such an order would cause irreparable harm to my client's legitimate business operations, and allowing continued conversion of assets would cause irreparable harm to my client, Patricia shot back. Judge Santos considered this for a moment. I'm inclined to grant the motion for accounting. Mrs. Whitmore Sullivan, you have 30 days to provide a complete record of all assets you've administered, including income and expenses, since your father's death. As for the restraining order, she paused, looking at both legal teams, I'll issue a limited order preventing sale or transfer of the specifically identified properties pending further review. Blackwood's face went red. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. What's irregular, Mr. Blackwood? is the potential that assets worth over $1 million were administered without proper notice to interested parties. I want to see the documentation both sides are claiming, and I want expert analysis of its authenticity. Judge Santos banged her gavel. We'll reconvene in 60 days for a full evidentiary hearing. Both parties are to provide complete discovery by that time. As the courtroom emptied, I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. We'd won the first round, but I could see from Blackwood's expression that the real fight was just beginning. Outside the courthouse, Patricia was cautiously optimistic. Judge Santos is fair but thorough. If our documents are legitimate, and I believe they are, we have a strong case. But Cordelia's not going to make this easy. What happens now? Now we wait for her accounting and prepare for the evidentiary hearing. In the meantime, you should be careful. Estate disputes can bring out the worst in people, and your sister has a lot to lose. As if summoned by her words, Cordelia appeared beside us, having separated from her legal team. Zeke, can we talk? Privately? Patricia started to object, but I held up a hand. It's okay. What do you want, Cordelia? I want to understand why you're doing this, why you're willing to destroy everything Dad built, everything our family represents, over money. I'm not destroying anything. I'm trying to get back what was stolen from me. Stolen? Her voice rose slightly. Then she caught herself and looked around at the people passing by. Can we at least discuss this somewhere private? There's nothing to discuss. The court will decide what belongs to whom. The court. She said it like a curse. You know what happens now, don't you? Everything becomes public record. Dad's business, our family's private affairs, every detail of our finances. Is that what you want? Everyone knowing our personal business? I looked at her carefully. What are you really afraid of, Cordelia? That people will find out you're a thief, or that they'll find out what else you've been hiding? Something flickered in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or calculation. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. And I think the court accounting is going to reveal more than just the assets you took from me. For a moment, we stared at each other in silence. Then Cordelia turned and walked away without another word. What was that about? Patricia asked. I'm not sure, but I think we're about to find out there's more to this story than just a simple inheritance dispute. As I watched Cordelia drive away, I realized that winning this case might be more complicated than I'd thought, but for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't backing down from a fight. The war had begun, and I intended to see it through to the end. The call came at 6 in the morning, jolting me from the first peaceful sleep I'd had in weeks. Patricia Henderson's voice was tight with excitement and something that might have been shock. Ezekiel, I need you to come to my office immediately. Don't talk to anyone, don't answer any calls from unknown numbers, and whatever you do, don't speak to your sister. What's wrong? What happened? Cordelia filed her accounting yesterday evening. It's not what we expected. How quickly can you get here? An hour later, I sat in Patricia's office, staring at a stack of financial documents that painted a picture more complex and damning than anything I could have imagined. The morning sun streamed through her windows, but the mood in the room was anything but bright. Walk me through this slowly, I said, my head spinning from the numbers and legal terminology. Patricia opened the first folder. Remember, we requested an accounting of all assets she's managed since your father's death. What she provided was technically complete, but it reveals activities that go far beyond simple estate administration. She spread out a series of bank statements. Your father left approximately $2.3 million in various accounts and assets. The house you found the deed to, the rental properties, the commercial building, that was just the beginning. There were stocks, bonds, additional real estate holdings, and a life insurance policy worth $500,000. $2 million? I felt dizzy. She told me there was barely enough to cover the funeral expenses. It gets worse, or better, depending on how you look at it. Patricia pulled out another set of documents. According to these records, your father began transferring assets to your name 18 months before his death. Not just the house, everything. Stocks, rental properties, even the life insurance policy. By the time he died, legally speaking, he owned almost nothing. It had all been transferred to you. I stared at the papers, trying to process what she was telling me. All of it? All of it. And here's the interesting part. Each transfer was accompanied by a letter from your father to you, explaining his reasoning. Letters that were never delivered. She handed me a manila envelope, thick with correspondence. My father's handwriting covered page after page, words I'd never seen, explanations I'd never received. My dear son Ezekiel, the first letter began, I know we've had our differences over the years, but I want you to understand that my respect for your independence and integrity has only grown. While Cordelia has always been focused on wealth and status, you've remained true to your values. That's why I'm ensuring that our family's legacy goes to someone who will honor it." "She intercepted all of these," I whispered. "That's what it looks like. But here's where it gets really interesting." Patricia pulled out a different set of documents. According to her accounting, Cordelia has been doing more than just collecting rent and managing properties. She's been using your assets as collateral for business loans, taking out mortgages against properties that don't belong to her, and, this is the big one, she's been selling off portions of your stock portfolio to fund what appears to be a failing investment scheme. She's been stealing from me to cover losses. Worse than that, she owes approximately $800,000 to various creditors, and she's been using your assets to keep her businesses afloat. The accounting she filed shows that she's essentially bankrupt, and your inheritance is the only thing keeping her from complete financial ruin. I leaned back in my chair, overwhelmed. 3 years of believing I was poor while my sister used my wealth to prop up her crumbling empire. 3 years of working in a warehouse while she lived off assets that legally belonged to me. "There's more," Patricia continued, her voice grim. "I've been doing some additional research, and I found something troubling. Your father's death certificate lists the cause of death as heart failure, but there's a notation that indicates he was found with elevated levels of medication in his system." A chill ran down my spine. What kind of medication? Heart medication that he wasn't prescribed. The coroner's report suggests it might have been an accidental overdose. Maybe he was confused about his dosage in his final days. But given what we now know about the timeline of asset transfers and Cordelia's financial situation, you think she killed him? I think we need to ask some difficult questions, and I think Cordelia knows we're going to ask them. As if summoned by our conversation, Patricia's secretary buzzed in. "Ms. Henderson, Theodore Blackwood is on line 1. He says it's urgent regarding the Whitmore case." Patricia picked up the phone. "Theodore, what can I do for you?" "I see. When?" "That's interesting timing. No, I don't think that would be appropriate. Fine, we'll see you there." She hung up and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Cordelia wants to meet. Today. She's prepared to offer a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" "Full restitution. Every asset returned to you, plus interest and penalties for the unauthorized use of your property. Complete surrender of any claim to your father's estate." I should have felt victorious, but something in Patricia's tone suggested there was more to it. "What's the catch?" "The catch is that she wants this done immediately, with a confidentiality agreement that would prevent either of us from discussing any aspect of this case, including what we've discovered about her financial activities and the circumstances of your father's death. She wants to buy our silence." That's how I read it. She knows we've uncovered more than just inheritance fraud. She's panicking. I thought about my father's letters, about the medication levels in his blood, about 3 years of lies and manipulation. "What do you think I should do?" "That depends on what you want, Ezekiel. Do you want your inheritance back, or do you want justice for what she's done?" Before I could answer, Patricia's phone rang again. This time she answered with growing concern, taking notes as she listened. "That was a contact at the medical examiner's office," she said after hanging up. "Someone requested your father's autopsy records yesterday. Someone who identified themselves as representing the Whitmore family interests. Cordelia? Or her lawyers. Either way, she knows we're looking into your father's death. She's trying to get ahead of whatever we might find." I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the Detroit streets below. Somewhere out there, Cordelia was probably in another office, plotting her next move, trying to figure out how to contain the damage from her years of theft and deception. "I want to meet with her," I said finally. "Ezekiel, I don't think that's wise. She's desperate, and desperate people are dangerous, I know, but I need to look her in the eye when I tell her that I know what she's done. All of it." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "If we do this, it has to be on our terms. Neutral location, witnesses present, everything recorded." "Fine, set it up." 2 hours later, we sat in a conference room at the Detroit Athletic Club, a neutral venue that Patricia had chosen for its security and respectability. Cordelia arrived precisely on time, accompanied by Theodore Blackwood and a woman I didn't recognize. Tall, severe-looking, with the kind of presence that suggested law enforcement background. "My associate, Janet Morrison," Blackwood said by way of introduction. "She specializes in complex financial investigations." Morrison nodded curtly but said nothing. Her eyes swept the room, cataloging exits and threats with professional efficiency. Cordelia looked tired. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her usually perfect posture seemed forced. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Zeke. I hope we can resolve this situation amicably." "I hope so too," I said. "But first I need to understand something. When did you decide to steal from me? Was it right after Dad's funeral, or did you plan it while he was still alive?" Blackwood started to object, but Cordelia held up a hand. "I never stole anything from you. I administered Dad's estate according to his wishes." "His wishes?" I pulled out one of the letters Patricia had shown me that morning. "You mean the wishes he expressed in the letters you intercepted? The ones where he explained why he was leaving everything to me?" For the first time, Cordelia's composure cracked. Her eyes darted to the letter in my hands, and I saw recognition there. "Or maybe we should talk about the medication that killed him," I continued. "The heart medication he wasn't prescribed, but somehow ended up in his system in lethal doses." The silence in the room was deafening. Morrison leaned forward slightly, her attention completely focused now. Even Blackwood looked surprised. "That's a very serious accusation," Cordelia said quietly. "It's not an accusation. It's a question. Did you kill our father to keep him from giving me my inheritance?" "Of course not," but her voice lacked conviction. "Then you won't mind if we request a full investigation into his death, toxicology reports, prescription records, interviews with his doctors and caregivers." Cordelia looked at Blackwood, who was frantically scribbling notes. "Ezekiel," she said finally, "you're making a terrible mistake. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The only mistake I made was trusting you for 3 years." She stood up abruptly. "I came here to offer you everything, your inheritance, full restitution, enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. All I asked for was discretion, and all I'm asking for is the truth." Cordelia stared at me for a long moment, and in her eyes I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear, not just of legal consequences or financial ruin, but something deeper, something that went to the core of who she was. "You have no idea what you're starting," she said finally. "Some secrets are buried for good reasons. Then maybe it's time to dig them up." She gathered her purse and coat with sharp, angry movements. "Come on, Theodore. We're done here." As they reached the door, Cordelia turned back one last time. "I tried to protect you, Zeke, from Dad, from the truth, from consequences you're not prepared to handle. But if you want to destroy everything, if you want to learn secrets that will haunt you for the rest of your life, then so be it." After they left, Patricia and I sat in silence for several minutes. "Well," she said finally, "that was illuminating. She killed him, didn't she?" "I don't know. But I think she knows more about his death than she's admitted. The question is whether we're prepared for what we might find if we keep digging." I thought about my father's letters, about the years of believing he'd died disappointed in me, about the house I should have been living in and the life I should have been living. "Keep digging," I said. "Whatever the truth is, I need to know." Patricia nodded grimly. "Then we're going to need more than just an estate attorney. We're going to need a criminal lawyer." As we left the Detroit Athletic Club, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just crossed a line from which there would be no return. The inheritance dispute had become something much larger and more dangerous, but for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was finally fighting for the right things: truth, justice, and the memory of a father who had loved me more than I'd ever known. 6 weeks later, I stood in the same probate courtroom where this journey had begun, but everything had changed. The gallery was packed with reporters, investigators, and curious onlookers drawn by the headlines that had dominated Detroit's news cycle for the past month. Inheritance fraud leads to murder investigation. Whitmore estate scandal rocks Detroit business community. Sister accused of poisoning father for fortune. Judge Santos called the courtroom to order, her expression grave. The case had evolved far beyond a simple estate dispute, and everyone in the room knew it. "Before we proceed with the inheritance matter," she began, "I want to address the criminal investigation that has developed parallel to these proceedings. Mr. Blackwood, I understand your client wishes to make a statement." Theodore Blackwood looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. The confident attorney who had dismissed our claims as frivolous now sat hunched over his legal pad, his earlier arrogance replaced by desperate damage control. "Your Honor," he said, rising slowly, "my client wishes to enter a plea agreement in the matter of People versus Cordelia Whitmore Sullivan." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Beside me, Patricia squeezed my arm. We'd expected this moment, but hearing it announced felt surreal. Cordelia stood at the defendant's table, her designer clothes and perfect makeup unable to hide the defeat in her posture. The woman who had manipulated and controlled every situation for 3 years looked small and fragile in the harsh fluorescent light. "Mrs. Whitmore Sullivan," Judge Santos addressed her directly, "do you understand the charges against you and the terms of the proposed plea agreement?" "Yes, Your Honor." Cordelia's voice was barely above a whisper. "Please state your plea to the charge of voluntary manslaughter in the death of Mortimer James Whitmore." The words hung in the air like a physical weight. 3 years of wondering, of suspecting, of hoping I was wrong, all came down to this moment. "Guilty, Your Honor." I closed my eyes and felt 3 years of suppressed grief crash over me like a wave. My father hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been murdered by his own daughter, my sister, for money that was already mine. And to the charges of theft, fraud, and embezzlement related to the administration of the Whitmore estate. "Guilty, Your Honor." Judge Santos nodded gravely. "Very well. Under the terms of the plea agreement, you are sentenced to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 8 years. You are also ordered to make full restitution to Mr. Ezekiel Whitmore in the amount of $2.8 million, representing all assets unlawfully taken plus interest and penalties." The courtroom erupted in murmurs and shifting bodies. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process that it was finally over. But Judge Santos wasn't finished. "Mrs. Whitmore Sullivan, before I accept this plea, I want to hear in your own words what happened. The court and your brother deserve to understand why you did this." Cordelia remained standing for a long moment, her back to the gallery. When she finally turned to face the room, tears were streaming down her cheeks, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in years. "Your Honor," she began, her voice stronger now, "I want to start by saying that I loved my father. Everything I did, I told myself I was doing to protect our family's legacy, to preserve what he'd built. That's not an explanation, Mrs. Whitmore Sullivan. Tell us what happened the night your father died." Cordelia took a shuddering breath. Dad had been transferring assets to Ezekiel for months, not just property, but everything, stocks, accounts, even the business. I tried to talk to him, to make him understand that Zeke wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility, that he would waste everything Dad had worked for. I wanted to interrupt, to object, but Patricia's hand on my arm kept me silent. That last night, Dad called me to his house. He showed me the final transfer documents, papers that would give Zeke control of the last of the business assets. He was going to sign them the next morning. I lost control. I started yelling, telling him he was making a mistake, that he was destroying everything we'd built together. What happened next? He had a heart episode, a mild one. He'd had them before. He took his medication and sat down to rest. But he was still talking about signing those papers, about how proud he was of Ezekiel's integrity, how he wanted to make sure the family legacy went to someone who would honor it rather than exploit it. Cordelia's voice broke, and she had to pause to compose herself. The courtroom was silent except for the quiet whir of the ventilation system. I went to the kitchen to get him some water. That's when I saw the extra heart medication in his pill organizer, pills he'd accidentally double-dosed earlier that week when he was confused. The doctor had warned us about the dangers of too much digitalis in his system. She looked directly at me for the first time since the hearing began. "I made a choice, Zeke, a terrible, unforgivable choice. I crushed those extra pills into his water. I told myself it would just make him sick, that maybe he'd be too weak to sign the papers for a few days, give me time to talk sense into him. But that's not what happened," Judge Santos prompted. "No, his heart couldn't handle the extra medication. He went into cardiac arrest within an hour. I called 911, performed CPR, did everything I could to save him, but it was too late." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. I felt Patricia's hand tighten on my arm as the full weight of Cordelia's confession settled over everyone present. "And after his death?" Judge Santos asked. "After his death, I convinced myself that I could honor his real wishes, not the confused decisions he'd been making at the end, but what he would have wanted when he was thinking clearly. I told Ezekiel there was no inheritance because I believed he would waste it, just like he'd wasted every opportunity Dad had given him. I stood up before anyone could stop me. He didn't give me opportunities, Cordelia. He gave me expectations I could never meet. The only thing he ever wanted from me was for me to become you." Judge Santos banged her gavel. "Mr. Whitmore, please." "No," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "For 3 years I believed I was worthless because you convinced me that's how he saw me. For 3 years I struggled and scraped and worked jobs that barely kept me afloat while you lived off money that was legally mine. You didn't just steal my inheritance, you stole my grief, my chance to say goodbye, my ability to mourn a father who actually loved me. Cordelia was sobbing now, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. I'm sorry, Zeke. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was so afraid of losing everything, of not being enough. You were afraid of not being enough? I could hear my voice rising, 3 years of suppressed anger finally finding release. You had everything. You had his approval, his respect, his trust in you to handle his affairs, and it still wasn't enough for you. Order! Judge Santos banged her gavel repeatedly. Mr. Whitmore, I understand your anger, but this is not the time or place. When is the time? I interrupted. When do I get to tell her that she destroyed both our lives for nothing? That the father she claims to have loved left everything to me because he knew she was exactly the kind of person who would do something like this? The courtroom had erupted into chaos. Reporters shouting questions, bailiffs moving to restore order, attorneys conferring frantically with their clients. But in the midst of all the noise, I found myself looking at Cordelia, really seeing her for the first time in years. She wasn't the powerful, manipulative woman who had controlled my life for so long. She was broken, defeated, consumed by the same insecurities and fears that had driven her to destroy everything she claimed to love. In her desperate attempt to preserve our father's legacy, she had become the very thing he had tried to protect it from. Judge Santos finally restored order and accepted Cordelia's guilty plea. As the bailiffs led her away to begin serving her sentence, she turned back one last time. "The house," she called out, her voice barely audible over the noise of the dispersing crowd. "Zeke, the house on Elmwood. Dad wanted you to live there. He said it reminded him of the home where we grew up before everything got complicated. He wanted you to have a place where you could be happy." And then she was gone, disappearing through the door that led to the holding cells, leaving me standing in a courtroom full of strangers, finally free, but somehow more alone than I'd ever been.